Good day everyone, and I will now start my report presentation. The assigned topic to me is genetic testing and genetic counseling. Testing is a type of medical test that identifies changes in genes, chromosomes, or proteins. The results of a genetic test can confirm or rule out a suspected genetic condition or help determine a person's chance of developing or passing on a genetic disorder. Genetic testing is voluntary because testing has benefits as well as limitations and risks. The decision about whether to be tested is a personal and a complex one. A geneticist or genetic counselor can help by providing information about the pros and cons of the test and discussing the social and emotional aspects of testing. Genetic test, it typically looks for changes in genes, chromosomes, and proteins. Gene tests studies DNA sequences to identify variations or mutations in genes that can cause or increase the risk of a genetic disorder. Gene tests can be narrow or large in scope, analyzing an individual's DNA block, one or more genes, or all of a person's DNA. On chromosomal genetic tests, it analyzes whole chromosomes or long lengths of DNA to see if there are large genetic changes, such as an extra copy of a chromosome that cause a genetic condition. And on a biochemical test, it observes the amount or activity level of a proteins or enzymes. Abnormalities in either can indicate changes to the DNA that results in a genetic disorder. There are 4 types of genetic testing: the molecular, gene expression, chromosomal, and biochemical tests. Molecular tests look for changes in one or more genes. These types of tests determine the order of DNA building blocks, or nucleotides, in an individual's genetic code, a process called DNA sequencing. In gene expression tests, it observes that which genes are turned on or off in different types of cells. When a gene is turned on or active, the cell produces a molecule called mRNA from the instructions in the genes, and the mRNA molecule is used as a blueprint to make proteins. Gene expression test studies the mRNA in cells to determine which genes are active. Overexpression or underexpression of a certain genes can be suggestive of particular genetic disorders, such as many types of cancer. The test analyzes whole chromosomes or long lengths of DNA to identify large-scale changes. Changes that might be found include an extra or missing copy of a chromosome, a large piece of chromosome that is duplicated or missing, or rearrangement of segments of chromosomes. Certain genetic conditions are associated with specific chromosomal changes, and a chromosomal test can be used when one of these conditions is suspected. For example, Leah syndrome is caused by a deletion of a section of chromosome 7. And lastly, biochemical tests. It does not directly analyze DNA, but studies the amount or activity level of proteins or enzymes that are produced from genes. Abnormalities in these substances can indicate that there are changes in the DNA that underlie a genetic condition. Let's now proceed to different uses of genetic testing. Newborn screening is used just after birth to identify genetic disorders that can be treated early in life. Diagnostic testing is used to identify or rule out a specific genetic or chromosomal condition. In many cases, genetic testing is used to confirm a diagnosis when a particular condition is suspected based on physical signs and symptoms. Diagnostic testing can be performed before birth or any time during a person's life, but it is not available for all genes or all genetic conditions. The results of a diagnostic test can influence a person's choices about healthcare and the management of the disorder. Carrier testing is used to identify people who carry one copy of a gene mutation that, when present in two copies, causes a genetic disorder. This type of testing is offered to individuals who have a family history of a genetic disorder and to people in certain ethnic groups with an increased risk of specific genetic conditions. If both parents are tested, the test can provide information about a couple's risk of having a child with a genetic condition. Fetal testing is used to detect changes in a fetus genes or chromosomes before birth. This type of testing is offered during pregnancy. If there is an increased risk that the baby will have a genetic or chromosomal disorder. In some cases, prenatal testing can lessen a couple's uncertainty or help them make decisions about a pregnancy. However, it cannot identify all the possible inherited disorders and birth defects. Pre-implantation testing, also called as pre-implantation genetic diagnosis or PGD. It is a specialized technique that can reduce the risk of having a child with a particular genetic or chromosomal disorder. It is used to detect genetic changes in embryos that were created using assisted reproductive techniques, or ART, such as in vitro fertilization, or IVF. In vitro fertilization involves removing egg cells from a woman's ovary and fertilizing them with sperm cells outside the body. To perform pre-implantation testing, a small number of cells are taken from these embryos and tested for certain genetic changes. Only embryos without these changes are implanted in the uterus to initiate a pregnancy. The last one is the forensic testing. It uses DNA sequences to identify an individual for legal purposes. Unlike the other tests described, forensic testing is not used to detect gene mutation associated with disease. This type of testing can identify crime or a catastrophe victims, rule out or implicate a crime suspect, or establish biological relationships between people, for example, paternity. Genetic counseling. Genetic counseling gives you information about how genetic conditions might affect you or your family. The genetic counselor or other healthcare professional will collect your personal and family health history. They can use this information to determine how likely it is that you and your family member has a genetic condition. Based on this information, the genetic counselor can help you decide whether a genetic test might be right for you or your relative. Here are some of the reasons why you might consider a genetic counseling. Planning for pregnancy. Genetic counseling before you became pregnant can address concerns about factors that might affect your baby during infancy or childhood, or your ability to become pregnant. During pregnancy, genetic counseling while you are pregnant can address certain tests that may be done during your pregnancy. Any detected problems or conditions that might affect your baby during infancy or childhood. Caring for children. Genetic counseling can address concerns if your child is showing signs and symptoms of of a disorder that might be genetic. Next, and the last one is managing your health. Genetic counseling for adults includes specialty areas such as cardiovascular, psychiatric, and cancer. Genetic counseling can be helpful if you have symptoms of a condition or have a family history of a condition that makes you more likely to be affected with that condition.